Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvis, Perik Ches, Halacha Vav, and Halacha Zayin. We're learning today Daf Samach Zayin, and we're going to begin on Daf Samach Vav Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the Dat Tone. So we just learned a whole new understanding of Halacha Dalit. Where a person walks into a baker and he takes a loaf of normal pudyon for the loaf of bread, but he tells the baker that when I'm going to gather on these, the wild sfichim, I'm going to bring them to you. And the Mishnah says, up until now, whether we view this as a gift for a gift, whether it was a commitment, whether it was a chulei, and what we learned yesterday is that no, there's a whole new thing over here that perhaps whether even though we're not allowed to debt, but there might be an exception that if you have a food worker, maybe such a worker is produce, and that will be the shita of the Chachamim of Arachemia that the Gemara later brought in a brayso that say that it's prohibited. They hold that no, there's no such an exception. Based on that, we're going to learn a brayso, and we're going to see that at least perhaps one approach of the brayso that we are beginning today's class with will be connected again to this new understanding of according to which is that according to our Mishnah, one is allowed to pay food workers with shvi'is product. Now, on Daf Samach Zayin, we're going to begin the Halacha Zayin, the Mishnah, the 7th Mishnah of the Perek. We're going to learn another ramification of the rule La'achla v'loy lahefseid. We're going to be speaking about whether you can mix into shvi'is truma, being that truma is subject to becoming tamei and thus prohibited for a kohen. There's no such prohibition on shvi'is, even if shvi'is product is tamei, equally is allowed to be eaten. So the concept of whether you are allowed to bring hegdish lidei psul or not, machlokes tanoim, Rab Shimon holds that you are allowed to indirectly bring hegdish to psul, as we'll speak out when we learn the sugya. That will be the topic, that will be the question, whether you can mix shvi'is with truma or not. And that will be the first rule in the Mishnah. The second rule in the Mishnah will be a rule that we learned so many times. The wording of the rule is acharoin nispas, that when the mei shvi'is is imbued with kedusha shvi'is, but if the mei shvi'is now buys something else, that something else is imbued with kedusha shvi'is, but the money goes out l'chulin. The original product always remains holy. The acharoin, the final product. So if you barter one food for another food, for third, for fourth, for fifth, for who cares how many, the last one will have kedusha shvi'is. The original always has kedusha shvi'is, but the ones in between will go out l'chulin. Now, when we speak about the transference of kedusha shvi'is, we will begin by speaking about a sale, right? So let's say I have shvi'is product, the oifen that I'm allowed to sell it. I sell it to you. You who have the food is holy. That food is always holy. And now my money is also imbued with all of the restrictions of shvi'is. Now I buy meat. In other words, the transference that we are referring to in the Mishnah is always through a sale. The Gemara is going to wonder whether there's such a transference, not only through a sale, but the way it works by hegdish. When you're machalal something, just as an example, if I have a Maisa Sheni product, I don't have to sell it. I can have my sasheni product, I can have money, and I can make a statement, I can make a declaration that I want for the kedusha of Aleph to go on to Beis. By Hegdish, it does work. We're going to have a machlokes amayroim whether such a chilul works by shvi'is, or does it only happen through a sale? That's a synopsis of today's daf. Chavre daf samach vav amid Beis. I know we were running yesterday. We started to learn this brayso, but we can learn it properly. Again, based on this new understanding of halacha dalit, based on the new understanding that our Tana holds that you are allowed to pay food workers with shvi'is product, even though normally shvi'is product may not be used to pay down a debt, may not be used to buy, But if you're paying a food worker, it's like food related. However, the Braisa that we also learned 2 days ago of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, that they say that you may not go into a bakery and tell them I'm taking the bread and I'm paying you with what Yarkoi Sadeh, even though the Tanakama holds you're not paying for the bread, you're paying for the work. He holds, I don't care if you're paying for the work, it's usher. And then we learned yesterday that Rabbi Yechanan paskind l'chumra, like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, that you are not allowed to pay food workers with product of shvi'is. Now we can understand the following brayso. Tani, we learned that hachamarin or v'hakatofim, these are two people that are called schleppers. No, it's people that are porters, people that are being paid to transport shvi'is produce. So the brayso says the words that are enigmatic, scharan shvi'is. What does it mean, scharan shvi'is? Their wages are shvi'is. There are two opposite ways of understanding it. One is l'kula, one is l'chumra. So Amar Rab Ze'eda explains, Rab Ze'eda, that we are talking about, now that we just gave our introduction, bepeiros heter ki masnisa, the braisa. I mean, to say stam, just say that the simple words means is that when you pay porters who are transporting shvi'is product, what you pay them becomes imbued with shvi'is sanctity. That makes no sense. Why would the money become imbued with shvi'is sanctity? How? So one option is that the Braisa is speaking about transporters who are not violating any halachic rule. They're doing nothing wrong over here. Number one, the product of shvi'is, just to speak out, was left hefker. The people that gathered it not with tremendous amounts, not to store it. It's before the time of biur. Even if they're transporting it for a sale, it's ba'ofen hamuter. As we learned so many dafim, that la'achla v'loy l'schayra is not an absolute rule. There are many times where you could sell. No, it's nothing wrong is happening. So I'm selling you my product of shvi'is when I'm allowed and the time that I'm allowed. And now we're speaking about paying these porters, and the meaning of scharan shvi'is means that you are allowed to pay them with shvi'is product. Gavaldik. No, it's like the Chachamim of our Mishnah. I know we just learned that Rabbi Yechanan says it's usher, but now that we introduce this new way of understanding our Mishnah, and our Tana holds, Stam Mishnah holds, that even though you're not allowed to pay choivis with shvi'is product, but there is an exception, that anything that's related to a food service, people that are working with food are allowed to get their payment and pay their shvi'is. And that's the meaning of scharan shvi'is, that you are allowed to pay them with shvi'is product. I daf samach zayin amad aleph v'hahi dohoyde Rabbi Yechanan le'ilan the base Rabbi Yanai. Didn't we just learn that Rabbi Yechanan, that was prior to that, we had a lenient psagdin, but then we learned Tashlamru dik psagdin, as we just explained it at the end of yesterday's share, that shelo yun leitlan schar badeyem shemen, they should not take their wages with oil. Even though you're paying them for work that they did with food, you have to pay them money. And a chanami, not a problem. Rabbi Yechanan paskint, like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia hoidolan, as we learned in the Braisa. But this Braisa that we just quoted, the interpretation of scharan shvi'is lekula, will mean that the Braisa follows the sheet of our Mishnah, halacha dalid, that we had on Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis. Gavaldik. However, you should know that there's a whole different way of understanding the words of this Braisa. And that is Rabbi Hila says that actually when the Braisa speaks about Hamarin and Katothim, they're speaking about people that are sinning when they are transporting food of Shvi'is. We're dafka speaking about someone that's violating Shvi'is. Just as an example, it's after the time of Bir. And Bir was not done. And these Jews don't care. And they're going about business as usual. That b'machatve peiros aveira hi masnisa. And the Braisa is telling you a rabbinic penalty that people that deal with product of Shvi'is when one was not allowed to do so, and they got paid for it, so the Chachamim say that money, ma hi scharan Shvi'is. What does it mean, scharan Shvi'is? It means that the chulin money paid by the employer to the worker acquires Shvi'is sanctity. It's a knas. There's no reason why that should have happened. They didn't say you have to throw the money to Yam HaMelech, but they penalized him. He says, you're dissing the sanctity of Shvi'is. Okay, the money now is imbued with Kedusha Shvi'is. And we find something similar. Ka'ai, the Omar Rababo b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, just as an example, that Yayin Nesach Knas Kinasu, just, first of all, Yayin Nesach is also Mida Oiraisa. In the Bavli, when we quote this din of Rababo b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, in the Bavli it says Yayin Nesach and Yayin Stam. That you should know that not only is Yayin Nesach Asun Mida Oiraisa, but we also may not do business with Yayin Stam. What happens if someone is doing business with that? So they penalized. You know what they told the person? That the money that you receive for this yayin is like yayin nesach. In that case, it means you can't have hana from the money. Why did they do that? Because if you are not honoring the status of yayin nesach, we're going to put that into the money. Now, you can argue if they don't care about this, they don't care about that. You're right. But that money, if they're going to try to use that money to go into a store or to use it with someone that is observant, they're not going to want to use that money if they'll know what that money is. And that's a penalty. So v'cha, here also, knas kenasu, interesting concept. That means it's after the time of beer. After the time of beer, you have to do beer. Or it's a product, let's say tzvichem. Let's say tzvichem cannot be eaten. Whatever the status of the food is, they put on the money. And that's the meaning of scharan shvi is a knas that they gave Gavaldik. Okay. Atkan halacha vav, and now we are beginning with halacha zayin. And we're moving me'inyan le'inyan, and this is a topic that we learned a lot also in Kachim, as we'll remind everyone in a moment. But first of all, one of the Chazal lemudim from the word la'achla regarding shvi'is is la'achla v'loy la'hefseit. That means we're not allowed to destroy Peda shvi'is. Shvi'is may be eaten bein betuma, bein betara. There's no such restrictions on shvi'is. Truma, aside of the fact that only a kohen can consume truma, but even the kohen can only consume truma if the truma is tahoida. If the truma becomes tamei, even though the kohen is allowed to derive benefit from it, but he has to burn it. You can derive benefit from the fire. Fire is fuel, fire is warmth, but you can't consume it. The question of our Mishnah is, if someone has, let's say, shvi'is vegetables, and when they're cooking it or when they're frying it, you need oil. Are they allowed to use shemen of truma to help them prepare the vegetables of shvi'is? That's the question. Why not? What would be the problem? I'll tell you what would be the problem. If this dish, if it will become tamei, if you would not have used shemen of truma, big deal. You would have been allowed to eat the vegetables, even though they're tamei. If you cook them, prepared them in oil of truma, the oil saturated into the vegetables, if that dish becomes tamei, then the vegetables will have to be burned together with the oil. You will not be allowed to eat the vegetables. Now, don't forget, you are not planning to make a tamei. Question is, are you allowed to do something that potentially will limit the consumption of shvi'is? And when the Torah says, la'achla v'loy la'hefseit, you're not allowed to destroy it. I'm not destroying it, but I'm doing something that might lead to its destruction. This is a topic that we have in Kachim. By Kachim, ironically, it's about Truma and Kachim. Now, Truma and Kachim may not be eaten betuma. They're equal. But Kachim generally has a very short expiration date, after which Noisar, even if a Kachim kalim 2 days and 1 night, the longest eating carbon, okay? Truma has no expiration date. Of course, if Truma goes off, you can't eat it, but you have Truma, you can eat it for a long time. So am I allowed to add spices of Truma? Kohen has spices of Truma. Can he put it into his kachim meat? I want to take a quick step back. B'chlal, one might have thought that when there's a big mitzvah for Kehanim to eat kachim. And not only that, we know that Kehanim oichlin u'ba'alim mischaprim, part of the kapara, or the greatest level of kapara, doesn't come about the burning it on the mizbeach. As Chassidus explains, the highest level of kapara comes dafka when the Kehanim eat it. It's a mitzvah eating. It's a holy eating. One would have thought that if it's a holy eating, you're not allowed to have hana. One might have thought so. You can't add spices. You can't make the food taste good. That's not the case. Part of the mitzvah is l'mashcha bahen, and Chazal say l'mashcha means to eat them the way nobility eat. The kohen has a mitzvah to enjoy the kachim food. So they spiced it up, or they sweetened it up, or they prepared it in a way that begashmias they would enjoy it. Al derech Shabbos, the part of the mitzvah of Shabbos is oinek Shabbos, to make tasty food on Shabbos. Al derech mitzvah Talmud Torah. Part of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is v'ha'arevna, to make it sweet. In other words, it's not like, oh, I'm going to learn Torah Lishma without a tam. I'm just Kabbalah Soil. I'm reading the Rambam. No, the mitzvah is to have pleasure. That's part of the mitzvah. So Kohanim would spice up. They would make their kachim food taste good. Are they allowed to add truma spices? Same issue, because truma without putting it into kachim can be eaten as long as it's fresh. Obviously, if it's not tummy, if you put it into kachim, then you limited the usage of truma. We have the same topic over there. Rab Shimon is the only Tana that holds that indirect limitations is not a problem. The words are, Rab Shimon holds, Meviim es hakachim lidei psul. I'm not allowed to directly limit something. I'm not allowed to directly downgrade. But if I do something which potentially might lead to, I don't care. Same thing will be over here. Now we said a big shtickle of today's daf, we said out by heart. Let's read it inside. Ein mevashlin yarek shel shvius b'shemen shel truma. The Tana Kama holds that you're not allowed to take shvius vegetables and cook them or fry them using truma oil. Obviously, we're speaking about a kohen, make no mistake. But a kohen in the kohen's home, it's his oil, he's going to eat it. Can't put, why? Shelo yivi'enu l'dei psul. You understand? Now, I want you to know there's a two-way street over here that our Mishnah is not talking about, that we learned together in the Bavli. There is another problem with this. Our Mishnah simply is focusing on la'achla v'loy la'hefsei to the shvi'is. That you're limiting, you might, if it will become tamei, now you can't have the shvi'is. I want you to know it goes on, there's another issue that our Mishnah is not discussing. What's the other issue? Let me go to the other issue. The other issue is that shvi'is has an expiration date. Biur. Again, truma has no expiration date. If you put oil of truma in a product of shvi'is, you are limiting the consumption of the truma. Let's say the time of biur for these vegetables is in a week. The oil of truma can last you for 5 years. And a chanami, it's the same issue. But we're going to focus on this direction, that don't downgrade the potential usage, consumption of shvi'is, because you're not allowed to waste it. And now that you're putting oil of truma, if it becomes tamei, now you'll have to waste it, you'll have to burn it. And Rab Shimon l'shitasai b'chlal, Rab Shimon allows it. And the words are, Rab Shimon holds that even by kachim, Rab Shimon holds that you are allowed lahavi lebeis absul. You are allowed to do something even though it potentially will limit some usage of kachim. Like we spoke out, according to Rab Shimon, you are allowed to add spices of truma into kach. You're allowed to do that, even though you're limiting now the truma. Truma is now bound to the rules of Noisan. So what? The kohen plans to eat it up. We're not going to burn any of it. He's going to eat up the steak. That's rule number one. Rule number two, here are the words. This is a foundational rule. After we already established so many times that not only is shvi'is sanctified, but the mei shvi'is is like shvi'is. The mei shvi'is is like shvi'is. And then we said, furthermore, it's like shvi'is, but it's more than by hegdish. By hegdish, if something is imbued, not kedushas mizbeach, but kedushas bedek habayis or meiser sheni. If you are machalalit, the kedusha leaves the original and it only goes into the new. By shvi'is, the original stays holy and the money stays holy. But it goes more than that. If you take this money and you buy meat, now the meat is holy, but the money is chulin. If you take the meat and you buy fish with it, you barter it for fish, the fish is holy and the meat is not holy. In other words, you have this chumrah by shvi'is more than by kachim, that the original is holy and then the last one is holy, but only the last one is holy. That's the meaning is of nispas b'shvi'is, that the very last one will be imbued, will be subject to shvi'is sanctity, but the original ones will not be. The middle ones, but the original one, v'hapedi la'atzma, you will also be yasser. It's the original one will remain holy. it also imparts its kedusha to that for which it was exchanged for. That which was exchanged for Pei Shvius, that will lose its kedusha if you exchanged it again. But then the latter one will have kedusha. The kedusha will go into the last item. And again, the Braisa will give you all of these steps of a bartering that you did in a sale. Okay, so the sale is able to divest kedusha, never from the first one, and it always stays in the last one. Both parts of the Mishnah will be properly elaborated in the Gemara. So let's begin with the Gemara. Tamon Taninon, recording a Mishnah in Zavachim. Ubikulam refers regarding all of the kachim that are eaten by kohanim. I mean, some kachim, kachim is a kalol taktar, completely burnt. But that's the anomaly. The rule is that I know that achilas ba'alim is only by kachei kalim, but by kachei kachim, let's go to a chatos. Chatos is eaten by male kohanim v'chulei. So menachas eaten by male kohanim, the shirayim, unless it's a minchas kohen v'chulei. So overkulam regarding offerings that are eaten by kohanim. First of all, hakohanim rashoyim lashanis v'achalosan. They are allowed to. Lashanis means they don't have to eat it in its natural state, like we explained. We don't say, it's a mitzvah. Don't ruin the mitzvah by making it tasty. That's a mindset people have. No. Lamashcha. That's the lamashcha behem. Look inside the first wide line in the Marafulda. They are allowed l'shanois ba'achilosan. Ula achlan kiderech hamalachim. When a king, when a noble man or woman, when they eat something, they eat it like the fanciest dish. As it says in Koirach, when the Hashem is enumerating, right, the Chav Dalet Matnas Kohuna, Lamashcha Bahem, and the word Lamashcha Bahem doesn't mean to anoint them. The word Mashcha is an expression, someone who's noble, the way they became noble was they were anointed. Eat it the way anointed ones eat it. Kederech HaMalachim. So first of all, which means, in the Braisa, back in the Braisa, Ula Achlan, if they want, they can eat it saluyim. They can have it roasted. If they want, they can have it shalukim. Shalukim is very much cooked. If they want, they can have it mivushalim. It's medium rare. So you prepare it any way you want. I know there's exception, right? Carbon Pesach is only, we know that, barbecued. But that's an exception. Normally, eat it the way you want. And more than that, add whatever you want to it. You can put in a tavle chulin, v'tavle truma. I want you to know there's a chiddush of tavle chulin. The chiddush of tavlin chulin, you're not allowed to bring chulin into the azara. I remember learning this. But that doesn't go to spices that you want to use for the kosher meat. There's a chiddush with that. But now let's focus. What we are quoting is that you can take tavle truma and you can put it inside. And that's a novelty. Why is it a novelty? Truma is not subject to noiser. When you put it into the Tanakama here is like Rab Shimon, right? When you put pepper, chveis, tavlin of truma into the kachim, so then the kachim can only be eaten for a couple of more hours. And if you don't, you have to burn it. The truma, if it won't be consumed, the truma is going to be burnt. Who says you're allowed to do that? You are allowed to do that. Rabbi Meir holds, Rabbi Meir here is like the chacham of our Mishnah. That lo yiten letoicham. No, you can't add truma. Chulin you can add. Why? Shelo yavi esat truma l'dei psul. Because now you are potentially going to be ruining the truma. Now what chap's very unusual. Okay, so that's it. So now we explain the context. When our Tanakama, which is Stam Mishnah without a name, says that you're not allowed to cook vegetables of shvius in oil, Stam, who is that following? That's following Rab Meir. When our Mishnah has a Das Yochid Rab Shimon that's saying you are allowed to do it, Rab Shimon, Das Yochid is the same of the Stam Mishnah in Zvachim. And all of that is going to pose a very interesting problem. And again, Kloli Halachim. When Rebbe, when he doesn't attribute a name to a din, our understanding is because Rebbe's through this saying this isn't only their opinion, it's everyone's opinion. That's one way of showing, and Yachad V'Rabbim Halachi Kirab. Even if you don't go with that, sometimes there's exceptions to that. You have other Klali Halacha. Like when certain specific Tanoim argue one against the other, So then there are rules. There are exceptions, but there are rules like whom is the halacha. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question. Oy bazoi, listen to the kasha. It's beautiful. Asya comes out, guys. There's different gersois. We're going to go with the brackets. Asya, the stama dahacha. Stama means the Tanakama here is really, now we know, is ki yichidoi de taman. Our ein mevashlen yolik shel shvius v'shaman shel truma. We know who that author is. Now we know it's not Rabbim. It's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir of Zavachim. In other words, what the Gemara is building up to is that now that we have the Mishnah and Zavachim, now we know that our Mishnah is not Chachamim and Rab Shimon, it's Rav Meir and Rab Shimon. And if you remember over there in Eruvin, Daf Mem Vav, where we have all of these klalim, Rav Meir and Rab Shimon, halacha ke Rav Meir. B'chlal, we say Rav Meir was the wisest of all. Ironically, sometimes other than Rab Shimon, Rav Meir, let's say in Rabbi Yosi, we pass like Rabbi Yosi. Because Rav Meir was so deep that the Chachamim were unable to even to understand, even though they knew that he's beyond their understanding, but since they didn't understand Soif Datoi, they couldn't paskin like him. You have to paskin based on your understanding. Nevertheless, the rule is Rav Meir and Rab Shimon, halacha ke Rab Shimon. So now, turning to the Samach Zayin, we're coming out with the kasha.
So how did they know that Rav Meir was right if they couldn't understand him the stuff Dato? Whatever, it's not the class right now.
That's why we normally don't paskin like him. But Rav Meir and Rab Shimon be passing like Rav Meir, because let me say it like this: according to most, mamish, according to most, if there is a machloikas between Nigla and Nister, we passing like the revealed part of the Torah. It's part of our Torah lav bashamayim, maybe. And Rab Shimon stam Rab Shimon is Rab Shimon by Yochai. Stam Mishnah is Rav Meir b'chlal. Like Rav Meir is Nigla, and Rab Shimon is a secret, and we don't passing like the secret. There was one big halachic authority that wrote a Shulchan Aruch, all based al pi Kabbalah. I have to remember who that is. One of the unique contributions of the Alter Rebbe that is extraordinary is that the Alter Rebbe reconciled Nigla and Nister. That was his chiddush and everything, both in the Nusach HaTfilah and in the Shulchan Aruch. He put them together, which is unbelievable. But prior to him, it was either or in some cases. But let's go to Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis. And same thing in the opposite. That the Stam Mishnah over there in Zvachim, now we know who the Stam Mishnah, when the Mishnah over there says you are allowed to add it. It's not everyone. It's not the Chachamim. It is our Yechidah. Yechidah here is Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon is the author of the Tanakama. And therefore what? Like we mentioned, the problem is, who do we paskin like? Normally, you would say, when you learn our Mishnah, when you learn the Mishnah over there, it's Stam Mishnah, but we can't say Stam Mishnah. How do we pass it? It's not a machloik, it's Stam and one. It's one against one. Ella indeed. The Stam of the Hach is Rav Meir de Taman. And therefore, but I take back what I said. When Rav Meir and Rab Shimon, Allah ke Rab Shimon, Slicha. Because I take it back. Rab Shimon, because people will yoyed l'soif datoi. Take back the whole speech over here about Nigla and Nister. The rule is Rav Meir and Rab Shimon, halacha ke Rab Shimon. That's exactly, we don't pass, and they couldn't chap. Rav Meir was too deep for them. It's just ironic because when you read our Mishnah, Stam and Rab Shimon, you would pass and Kistam. That's the rule. But the Gemara is saying, Taki, you don't. Ella, the Stama Dahacha is Rav Meir de Tamon. Our Mishnah is not Chachamim and Rab Shimon. We're standing with that. Now we know our Tanakama is Rav Meir, and therefore Rav Meir, the Rab Shimon, halacha ke Rab Shimon, and that's a psak that the Gemara is giving. Lekula, you are allowed to add, you can cook vegetables of shvius in oil of truma. That's basically what the Gemara is saying. Amar Rabbi Yosi, however, even though that should be the rule, but it's not the case. That ish ta'alis li'ilen, the base Rabbi Yanai. I once asked those household members of Rabbi Yanai what they did based on Rabbi Yanai and Amran. They said that nehigan haveinon, what was our minig? That we were mevashlin only al yod v'oichlin. So now we have something gavaldik, that if indeed we would have paskin like Rab Shimon, which is normally the rule, then there are no restrictions. You can cook vegetables in oil of truma, period. But in their house, they only cooked very small amounts at a time, small amounts that they can finish in one eating. Now, what comes out over here is that according to Rab Shimon, you would not have to do it. Obviously, the fact that they didn't cook it kinohug, they paskin like Rabbi Meir. Rav Meir is the one that holds that you're not allowed to bring a kachim lebeis hapsul. And on the other hand, even let Rav Meir, there's a leniency. When does Rav Meir say you're not allowed to do that? That's if you're doing it in abundance, because it might become tamei. And if it becomes tamei, then you'll have to burn the shvius. And but if you are cooking only a little bit out of a time, of course it can also become tamei, but you limit that possibility. In other words, if you're not going to be saving the food for later, you're cooking it and you're eating it, even Rav Meir, who's machmer, will be lenient. And that's gavaldik. Bottom line is that my kedoin, what does that mean? That they paskin like Rav Meir the Tamon, which is kerabanan the hachem. And now why would they do that? I'll tell you why they would do that. Why would they paskin like Rav Meir? Rav Meir and Rab Shimon, because Rebbe wrote it as a Stam Mishnah. That was the way Rav Yanai himself must have understood it that way. He must have understood that the Chachamim agreed with Rabbi Meir. That's why here in Shviz, he did not write Divrei Rav Meir. He wrote it Stam. Stam and Rab Shimon, halachic is Stam. Which is another way of saying halachic Rav Meir. Okay, Gavaldik. Now let's move on. And now we're moving on to the second part of the Mishnah. And the big rule is ha'achrein nisbas b'shviz. Even though the payday itself is always usher, the original stays usher. But once it went from the payday into money, both are holy. The original stays. The money depends. If this is the end of the line, the money remains holy. But if you're going to use the money to buy new foods, the money goes out l'chulin, and the new foods become imbued with shviz. And if you barter those foods for more foods or for money, so it keeps on grabbing the last transaction. And now the Gemara is going to quote a Braisa that's going to give you a scenario just to paint this picture of the rule of achrin nispas. Let's say you barter. Forget about the money. You have vegetables and you need meat, so you make an exchange. The original, we say, the payday atzma is asur. So elu va'elu misbarim b'shvius. As an example, one of the consequences of kedusha shvius is that when it comes to the time of biur, you have to get rid of it. L'rambam, whichever way you want to do it. Those restrictions will go now on the meat also. Both of them are subject to biur. Now, what happens if someone doesn't eat up the meat? He takes the meat and he decides to make a barter with fish. Lokach b'basar dagim. That's what the Mishnah is telling you. We're machmir, but that's it. We don't say all three are holy. No, the original is holy. The vegetables are holy. The fish is holy, but the meat now is freed from kedusha shvius. Yatsa basar and nispesu dagim. It's chat. It's caught. The dagim were caught, not the meat. The meat goes out free. Now, if a person takes the fish and he buys oil, same thing. Yatsa dagim v'nichnas shemen. So thus explains the Braisa. That's the example. Ha'achrin nispas b'shvius. But make no mistake, the original always remains holy. Now, the case that the Braisa gave was all about buying and selling a transaction. And as we spoke out in the words of introduction, what do we want to know? We would like to know whether the same of the middle ones are freed up. Could it happen through an act of chilul, even without a sale? A sale means a sale. We know what a sale means. Chilul means I'm not selling it to anyone. What happens if I have vegetables of shvius, and you had meat? Your meat is meat. Meat is not there's no kedusha shvius in meat, and I exchanged my vegetables from. Now I have meat. Now we're saying, the meat also is bound to the laws of shvius. Whatever the vegetables is bound to, so is the meat. Okay, I have in my house fish. I want to leave the meat for tomorrow, and I want to eat the fish today. Tomorrow there's already going to be a chiyuv of biur. Can I make a declaration that made the kedusha of the meat go into the fish? Can I make a chilul as I could by Meiser Sheni, as I could by Kachim? When I want to desanctify something that's holy onto money, I don't have to do it only through a sale. If I have both items, I make a statement that this should go into that. That's the question. So they asked from Rabbi Yechanan, even though the Baraisa only spoke about a lakach, spoke about buying and selling, Mao sheteitzi derech chilul, does it also work even with chilul? Machlokes Amayraim. Machlokes Rabbi Yechanan and his Talmud Chaver Rabbi Lazar. Amar lahu, so Rabbi Yechanan responded to those who asked. He didn't say yes. He said v'lamalo. Why not? Where do we get the whole idea of chilul from? Where do we get this whole idea? Is the source of kedusha going in, going out is from kachim by hegdish. By hegdish, I know it's not the same because by hegdish the original also goes out lechulin. By hegdish, this transference doesn't need to happen through a sale. So why not? If this whole concept is learned from hegdish, why should it be different than hegdish? No. Amar Rabbi Lazar, it's not true. It's different than hegdish. First of all, you see that shvius is more chamur. Because by Hegdish, the original one goes out lechulin. By Shvius, we keep on emphasizing the original one, the Hapedi Atzmai, remains also. It's not the same. Like we're more machmer regarding the original one, similarly, the transference of the middle ones can only happen through a sale. Amar Rabbi Lazar, ein Shvius yoytze derech chilul, ere derech mechira. Machlokes Amayraim, zok the Gemara, you know what? If you really look in the Braisas, you'll find a Braisa here and a Braisa there. I have both a Masnisa Messiah Lidain, and I also have a Masnisa Messiah Lidain. So you won't have a kasha. So it's really a Machlokes Tanoim, and each one can paskin like the Tana that they understood is the the Tana that had for them the right approach. Masnisa Messiah Rabbi Yechanan. Now we're quoting a Braisa that we found that called Mishi Yesh Leimois Midmei Shviz. If you have money, that's called money of Shviz. And you want to use the money for items that you cannot use shvius for. Like we learned, just like shvius can only be eaten, consumed, achila shtia sicha, ma'i shvius can only be used for achila shtia and sicha, and maybe not even for water we learned. Maybe machlokes tanoim. What happens if I want to use the money to buy a pair of clothing? No problem, says the Braisa. You have dough in your house. You have money, you have $10, you have a dough worth $10. That's what you do. Like Rabbi Yechanan, that you can deconsecrate the middle, the money, not only through a sale, even through a declaration of chilul. Abed, on the other hand, Masnisa, I have another Braisa, you can't refute Rabbi Lazar because there's a Braisa that goes to his side. Misail Rabbi Lazar. What's the Braisa? And you have a coin that's imbued with Shvius sanctity. And you want to buy a shirt, you want to buy clothing, and as we just mentioned, ma'oi Shvius may not be used for buying clothing. So what are you going to do? So look at the convoluted solution the Braisa gives. That you have to go to a storekeeper that there's trust, because there'll be an act of trust that's needed. No, it's a chenveni that would like to accommodate you. You're a good client. And listen to what you have to do. And he tells this storekeeper that's selling food, I can use shvius to buy food. I don't want food, but I go to the store. Give me produce for this money. This money has kedusha shvius, which means that the peiros now, because of the sale, will be imbued with kedusha shvius, but the money will go out l'chulah. Okay. You got it? So the kedusha left the coin and it went into the food. Who has the coin? The storekeeper. Who has the food? The guy that wants to buy a shirt. After they make this exchange, this is the trust that they have, then they tell him, you know what? I'm going to give you a gift, the food that I have, and you're going to give me a gift, the coin that you have. And now the chenveni is doing him a favor. He's accommodating him. Why is that? Because now this food has kedusha shvius. But that's why we said a chenveni. Because in my home, not a balabas, in my home, I don't want to have restrictions on my food for biur, for example, or you can't take it out of Israel. But a storekeeper has so many customers, some of them won't mind buying Peder Shvius because they plan to eat it today. They don't plan to take it out of the Holy Land. They don't plan to store it. A chenveni with goodwill, by the way, he might even lose a few pennies. So be it. But that's the only solution. No, you have to be mechalel it. How? By making a purchase. And now that they exchanged the food for the money, now the original guy, and it's self-understood that if chilul would have been done, if you can do chilul, why do you have to make all this craziness? Everyone has produce in their home. Most of us, hopefully, we have food in our home. Take the money, go over to the food in your home, go over to your Isa, and make a declaration. The kedusha of the money should go into the dough and go buy a shirt. Fact that you have to do this whole shtick with the chenveni, that's a raya that this brayso holds, like Rabbi Lazar, that chilul of shvius is more chamur than hegdish. And it only happens in the middle ones if you do an act of a sale. And we're going to stop over here, and we're going to God willing to be continued. Maybe hear good news from the Holy Land. Maybe hear continued good news from the Holy Land.